Hello and welcome to It's Personal Stories. My name is Lan Elliott on behalf of It's Personal Stories, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering personal success. And today I'm happy to have my friend Dan Peak, the president of Jones Lang LaSalle Hotels and Hospitality for the Americas region with us. And if you're not familiar with Dan, who has been in the industry for many, many years representing owners who are selling their hotels, I hope you'll go to our website where you can see more about his many accomplishments. So, welcome, Dan.
Great to be here. Thanks, Len.
Thank you
Good to
so
see you.
much for agreeing to come on. Yes.
Absolutely.
Dan, I know you've had an incredible career because I feel like we came up in the industry in real estate almost around the same time. Could you share some of the inflection points in your successful journey and if there were factors that were contributions to your success?
Yeah, I would say, I think like a lot of people, I didn't start out, I didn't begin with the end in mind. So my, when I started my journey to higher education, I thought I studied journalism. So I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. That lasted for about a year, and I found out that was not for me for whatever reason. And I look back at the time, and I was very young, and I was like, I'd always worked in hotels and restaurants as a kid. And I was like, well, maybe there's a career in that. And so that really started a journey of education, thinking, that I would work in the operations world. And that I started down that path of training, going to hotel school and working for one of the big brands and working for one of the independent operators managing hotels. And then, realizing about the time that we were starting a family that there's some inherent challenges in the operating world, and I also had a curiosity about investing in real estate, and so did it from a bridge perspective. Kind of got into the consulting world, which was a place I considered when I got out of school, and I was welcomed back into that part of the sector, and literally stumbled across the industry that I've been in for the last 27 or 28 years, which is, kind of broadly speaking, hotel capital markets. And so I would say, the first, those are several inflection points. First, kind of not realizing that, hospitality was a career for me. And then not realizing that, and then stumbling across this idea of real estate, and then transactional real estate. And so, again, you sort of, when you're early in your career, you don't know that you're really on a path, but that, kind of, again, coming across the transactional world, first with a small firm, which was an incredible learning experience. It was sort of like, managing a small hotel. You kind of did everything. You did the analysis, you wrote the package, and you did the execution with your partners, and you learned a great deal. And so today, those are in a bigger firm. There's a handful of people who do that on every project, but back then you were sort of like you were the handful of people. And so kind of that hands-on learning and sort of watching, what we do today evolve as a business and become bigger and more sophisticated and more broad-based, was fascinating, right? So in and of itself, that was a bit of a kind of a tipping point for me. And then, I started to look around and realize, well, there seems to be a bigger real estate world out there, and trying to understand that perspective that, well, how do these assets get financed, and, who raises all this? Where does all the equity come from? It's not just sort of sitting around. And so that's where I joined a company at the time called HFF, and helped build a hospitality practice there. And that was a company that had a very big presence in the debt business and in the equity business and in the other product types, and looking for ways to sort of create that synergy. And so, with hospitality kind of alongside, office and multi-housing and industrial and the many other product types that exist in the commercial real estate universe. And so, and that's also where I would say, stepped into more of a leadership role, where I realized that, it wasn't about me. I had to build a team, and I had to go find, and sort of that's where I sort of found my passion, right? My passion was building a team and sort of looking for, kind of the next generation of members of our sector, and people I'd work with, when they literally from their first days in our business, and then obviously evolved from there. So I would say, kind of identifying this is just something people did, which I had no idea at all, and then identifying, or at least coming into contact with different ways to do it, and it becoming a broader business. And today, I sit as one of over 100,000 people in a global company that obviously just not just within the hotel space, but broadly touches the real estate world literally everywhere around the globe, and that interconnectivity. So it sort of for me, has continued to evolve, and work with a much bigger team, and a lot of specialization right across the board. So it's been a fascinating journey, I'll be honest with you. And but when you see those points, you sort of it's you jump, you sort of you kind of, in a sense, sort of close your eyes and jump and take the risk. And they turned out to be good risks. Not all of them were perfect, and they all had bumps in the road, but I would say each step has resulted in progress. And I've never, you never stop learning, right? I'm learning things today. I literally learn things today, about my business, and about the people I work with, and about the industry I sit within, that I quite literally did not know yesterday.
It's fascinating, your journey. And I agree, the area of the industry, which is real estate and capital markets, isn't so obvious to a lot of people when you look at the industry. And like you, I had to find my way there as well. I'm curious if you think there is a particular skill or trait that has made you very successful in your career.
That's a good question. I would say, um, it is a difficult business. It's one where the path isn't always straight, and it's not always clear. There's a lot of fog on the horizon. So I would say, my favorite word in the English language, and I think the most important trait for someone who does what we do, is perseverance. Is you sort of have to get up every day and keep moving. And I remember, there's been a lot of rough days in our business. When the market's difficult, or the project's difficult, or the two parties aren't seeing eye to eye, what have you, in a transaction, and you sort of, you kind of beat up at the end of the day. I remember reading Colin Powell's book, and he always said, one of Powell's rules was, it always looks better in the morning. Go home, get a good night's sleep, think clearly in the morning. It always, and then it was actually a great point, because I, inevitably, this morning, I quite literally woke up, and I sent an email to my partner, at about 5:30 in the morning. And I didn't even tell him what it was, but it was sort of, I had some clarity in the morning, and I had a different perspective on something we've been struggling with. And so, like, little things like that, but perseverance, keep working away, keep chipping away. I think that's number one. You need to sort of accept the fact that you don't have all the answers. Be willing to accept, help, advice, suggestion, be open to suggestion, right? I think, as we grow in our careers, you can have a tendency to sort of like, oh, been there, done that. I get it. Well, you don't always get it. And so there's always, again, to my prior point, there's always something to learn. So always being willing to open-minded and to learn. And so I think those are really two key things. But that being able to persevere and kind of and do it with, do it in the right way, in a positive way, right? I think there's, you can become, people can become, a little edgy, right, in our business. And I think that's it, life's too short. Wake up, do your best, keep moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's two really important things I wanted to pull out of that, which is this idea of to keep going, this
Mhm.
perseverance, putting one foot in front of another, because especially real estate is very cyclical. There are moments like we've been in where there's uncertainty and
Yep.
nothing happens, and you need to just keep plugging away at it and knowing it will turn around and it will
Mhm.
come back. It usually comes back stronger than it ever was.
Mhm.
And the other piece of it is taking the space to clear your mind, to go do something else, and just trust that the answer will come,
Yeah.
or that you will have a more measured response than you would have had in that moment. I've
Sure.
been known sometimes it takes me a week to have a more measured response, but
Mhm.
if you can give yourself that space and wait
Yep.
until you can come back with the right uh, thoughts, the right approach, it can
Mhm.
make such a big difference. Absolutely.
That to me is also always one of the benefits I have of working within a larger organization. And there's benefits to being in a smaller organization, a larger organization. One of the benefits is a lot of partners with a lot of different experience, right? And a lot of team members who've seen and different things. And one of the reasons I say I look at it's like I have a big bag of tools. And so I can take a step back, I can get advice, and at the end of the day, we're trying to solve problems for our clients. And I made, my natural inclination is sort of, like I like to use I have a hammer and I like to use the hammer. It might require a wrench, it might require a screwdriver, it might require something else. I can turn to my partners and I can help, craft a solution that meets our clients' needs. At the end of the day, it's the client's needs that have to be met. And so I think, yeah, you're right. Being able to step away and look at something from a fresh perspective to solve a problem, create a solution, right, is really the key to success in this business, particularly as things evolve and the market evolves every day.
Yeah. And I think also you mentioned not assuming that just because you have a hammer, that the hammer is going to be the answer, and being
Correct.
open to asking other points of views and being able to pull together diverse ways of approaching a problem and maybe finding a better one than you would have otherwise. You had
Completely agree. Yeah.
you had touched on high performing teams, and you've had to do this a few times, and obviously what you do in your business, you are working for clients. They always want the best prices, or maybe 20% better than the best prices ideally, and having those right team members is really critical. How do you go about building high performing teams? How do you think about it? Are you looking for something in the people on your team? How do you think about building a team?
I mean, I think it starts with attitude. I think attitude is really the most important thing. Is like someone who has a positive attitude, who really wants to be part of a team. I think we play a team sport. It's not an individual sport. It's a team sport, and we all bring different skill sets. I mean, the degree to which certain members of our team can analyze, financial performance, or can look at a market, or can understand physical condition of an asset, or can understand what's going on on the financing side, and kind of the complexity in the financing markets today, the complexity in the structure of equity today is. And so you got to bring together again, it's a little bit like tools, right? You got to bring together the right players. But that attitude is everything. I think one of the joys I've had is, when you sit in the chair I've sat in for a while now at a few different places, we describe that as player coach, right? So really, at the end of the day, we never sort of become in our company and in the companies I've been in. We don't become managers. We don't just sort of sit behind a desk and orchestrate. We work on transactions. We work on client situations, and we work together with the teams. And that the player coach, and sort of over time I've become more coach than player. I still do both, but I'm more coach than player. And that's the great joy of my career, is the coach role. And so, particularly with younger people who are growing in the career, and having been there, is just sort of like helping them sort of find their path, and helping them become part of a high performing team. And the other thing about our business is it's like a project based business, right? So one day you're on this team, and you're also working on that team, and you're working on this third team. And so being able to figure out how to work together. And so what I loved, and what I've been able to do over the years is grow teams that sort of, they, in a sense, kind of grow up together, right? You sort of like you build the culture together. You establish best practices together. So in a sense, it's not a you're not dictating down, all right, this is how we do it this way, dot the I, cross the T. But you learn best practices, and you try to hold everyone accountable to best practices, but you're always open to new ideas. And so I think high performing teams are, the best ideas come from across the board, and you always ask questions, right? Like if you ever think back to when we were in school, there was a lot of studying of different, like, manufacturing around the world. I mean, I remember Two things I always remembered. I always remember all the studies that were done about like Toyota's manufacturing process, right? And they had that sort of five or I think it was 5 or 6 whys. When something went wrong, they always kept asking different why questions to try to understand exactly what happened and learn so that the next time it was better. And then I always remember Jan Carlson's book, Moments of Truth, who ran Scandinavian Airlines, which I'll never forget. I talk about that all the time. And when I see somebody do something really well, and it's like those are the two things. It's really every single day we learn that ability. And it's a high performing team always asks questions about, if something went wrong, we ask why, or at a moment of truth, when something went right, we acknowledge it. And so I think we're just always looking for, and I think it's the best way to do that is sort of when you build that team together over time and you develop your culture and your best practices together versus here's the 475-page handbook, just do it this way, right? That doesn't work, particularly in our business where there's a lot of creativity and a lot of opportunity for growth. And then lastly, I would say that opportunity for growth is really important. I think there's certain practices in our broader industry that we sit within where people get they're sort of in a role and they're in that role for a very long time, and it becomes a bit of a negative cycle, right? Because it's like, okay, where do I go now? What's next? And I always want to sort of reinforce the fact that no, you establish the ceiling. Once you're ready, in a sense, you develop your replacement. You develop who's going to take your place on the team, and then you move up. And our job as leaders is to sort of find more space for you. Where is there white space? Where is there an opportunity? Where are we not? None of us have 50, 60, 70% market share. There's always room for more people to go out and find new business and find new opportunity. And so a high performing team, as much as we love to keep everybody exactly where they are, is really one that sort of continually grows and creates more what we call producers. And so that's always about sort of priming the pump and kind of maintaining that growth, the growth of the team over time.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I always find that I get itchy once I figured out everything in my job and I've done all the things I can see, then I start to look around and I get a little more itchy for the next challenge. I'm always looking for a new hill to climb.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that long-term view of how do we continue to engage the team members? How do we continue to challenge them and grow them and make sure they have opportunities to go to the next level rather than just staying in the same spot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think it's a great way to keep people if they're continuing to be challenged and finding new opportunities.
And that's one of the great things about being in a larger organization is that there are more paths for everyone in their future, because not everybody's going to it's not a straight line. It's not everyone's going to start here and then you go to this one, you go to that one. You can go in different directions. You can go up. I know people who focused in on the equity side, who moved to the debt side, who focused in on this product type and went to a different sector, who started in one market and went to the other side of the country, because that's where they saw opportunity and that was their calling. And as a leader, you need to be supportive of that. When you have a strong team member and they have a calling to take the next level, and by the way, sometimes that is a calling, then they say, you know what, I need to go do something else. And I get that. Sometimes I'm sad about it, which I get because I enjoy working with them. But I also, if you listen and you understand and you think about who they are and where they want to go and how that next step is going to get them there, you're supportive. Because look, at the end of the day, that happened to me too. I did not spend the last 35 years of my career in the same company. I had to move around a little bit, change my jobs and change what I do and change the firms I work at to kind of get to the place where I am. And so I respect that in others, and that's what we have to do. And sometimes it's not easy, but it is. You want to be supportive of your team and what's right for them.
Absolutely. Agreed. You had mentioned you love being able to bring people in at the beginning of their career and grow them. What do you think is required for a young person to distinguish themselves? What makes them stand out?
I'll go back to the original, one of my original comments, which is attitude. That sort of openness, willingness, being a good teammate. That's number one. As much as we'd love you to be, to show up and be, the best possible Excel modeler, I think that's, that's great, but we can help refine that skill. That's easy. You can get training for that. But being a good teammate, being good in the huddle, being good in the, kind of in the trenches together, I think is number one. Being willing to constantly learn, being able to learn, take some direction, I think is good. Communication skills have become are at a bit of a premium today. I will tell you, when we bring in a young person who can communicate and who can write, it stands out. It stands out. It really does. And taking the time to think about what you're communicating and writing is unbelievable. Um, there's a young woman on our team who is like sort of she's almost like the designated proofreader, and she is shockingly young, and I to be the proofreader. But I look at, like, I send something and I get it back, and I'm like, I can't believe I missed that. So it's sort of like that's one of the things we look for. And but look, at the end of the day, it's that sort of joy, right? Positive attitude, that sort of joy, and that willingness to learn is the most is that's the key, right? If you want to, in a sense, you want to be a sponge. You want to absorb as many things as you can. And then lastly, those skills that we're all going to require, which is you kind of have to roll with it, right? It's a little bit of that perseverance and a little bit of that dealing with adversity, right? I would say that dealing with adversity in life, let alone business, let alone your job, right? And that having to deal with, we've all had to. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think so that ability to do so and having that sort of toughness, that mental toughness, I think is another one of those aspects to distinguish yourself. I mean, it doesn't, you don't have to be harsh, you don't have to be mean, but just mentally tough. Sort of keep moving in the same direction, even though, because you're not always going to like the decision a client makes. We're going to work real hard and pitch something, and we're going to lose. We're going to work really hard on a deal, and it's going to get to the 5-yard line, and it's going to blow up, and it's not going to succeed. And you have to be willing to sort of, all right, go home, shake it off, get up the next day, and come back and just keep going forward. So there's a lot of things there, but at the end of the day, it comes back to attitude. Attitude it's not everything, but it's a lot of it.
It's very hard to teach.
It's
So
very hard to teach. All those things are hard to teach. A lot of that's about your sort of how you grow up and where you come from, and you can learn them, but sometimes it's already there. And there's a lot of that's growing up and it's playing on the playground and being on a team and being in a class and kind of going away to school. All those things, you pick a lot of that up along the way.
absolutely. And I love that you mentioned several times this idea of continuous learning, because when you come out of school, a lot of times people think I'm done with my learning, but you're only just beginning. And then you learn how to do your job,
Right.
and you get really good at learning how to do your job. And then it's not about knowing how to do your job.
Right.
It's doing all the other things that will continue to propel you forward into leadership. You'd mentioned the books that you had read. There is more than just being really good at your job. If you really want to go to the higher echelons, you have to also figure out how to become a good leader and do that growth piece and learn how to do that in addition to just being excellent at your work. So,
For sure.
thank you for calling that out.
Yeah.
One of the important things that is needed to really be successful are mentors and champions who support you in those rooms that you don't get to be in. How important is it to find mentors and champions, and how does one go about it?
I mean, I think it can be. I think, if I look back in my life, I mean, my mentor started when I was in middle school. I remember distinctly, beyond just my family, right? But people beyond my family who took an interest. And it was more than just, hey, how you doing, right? It was people who gave me sage advice about things. There's things in my head that I think of all the time, from a friend of my dad's who was athletic director and the football coach at my high school, and another friend of our family's a friend of mine's father, who always had the most incredibly direct advice. Like there was no, sort of like the no BS, sort of like, Your dad might not, your mom and dad might not want to say this, but I'm going to say this type of thing. And sort of like, there was that along the way. And those are things I never forget. And and then obviously there's people I've worked with over the years. I think you can seek them out. I think you can identify them and spend time with them. But number one, it's that willingness, it's that positive attitude. But you need those folks within the organization who are going to support you. And I think the best way to do it is to sort of try to work closely with them. And I will tell you that some of those. Some of the people that I've been, some of the people that I've been mentors with were sort of like direct supervisor, where I had a very close relationship. Some of them were people who just took an interest, and I didn't always take advantage of those things. I'll be honest with you, and that's probably a failure on my part. So when somebody within an organization or within an industry takes an interest in you, take advantage of that. Follow up, right? In a sense, they're throwing you a line. That means they probably are willing to serve in that role, and you should take advantage of it. It may not work, may not be, but take it. Don't turn your back on those sorts of things. Don't. You're not too busy to call back that individual who might be 20 or 30 years older than you, who's seen it all before, right? Or most of it before, and who's willing to share, kind of some perspective. Just chat, right? Just have a call. One thing I try to do is whenever somebody reaches out to me, or often it'll be one of my somebody I know in the firm will say, "Hey, will you talk to so and so?" And I try to always say yes. Because at the end of the day, somebody said yes to me when I needed to talk to someone. And like, for instance, what I would consider one of my mentors here within the firm, who stayed here, and now when I'm back, we're still, we stayed friends the whole time. Very important person to me in my life, and knows my wife, knows my family. Called the other day, and I called him right back, and I was just like, yeah, let's talk. And we talked for half an hour, and we talked for 15 minutes about business and 15 minutes about life, and hung up and felt better. And those relationships really matter. And so I would seek those people out. I would seek people that you have some commonality with, and I would seek some people that you think you have zero in common with, to talk to and to try to understand, because I think that's really important. Recently, we had a dinner for one of the most senior people in the firm, who's who for all intents is retired. Um, and we were, and a bunch of us were there, and we all said something, and they were all people who've known him even a lot longer than I have, and I would sort of come to me, and I'm like, at the end of the day, I was able to say a few things that I don't think that person knew, to the degree that it did, that made a difference to me. And we probably talked to each other 3 or 4 times a year. But it really made a difference. One of the reasons I work at the firm I do today, and I've worked at HFF, probably the reason, right? And so these things can really have a dramatic impact on your lives. So I would seek those people out, and by the way, sometimes you will seek out a mentor or champion or whatever, and they're not going to be responsive. That's okay. Don't give up on it. Somebody else is out there. But again, I would seek it out. I would try to connect. And again, as much as it's easy to connect with someone who you think sees the world the same way that you do, connect with somebody who doesn't, because you will learn an awful lot from that dynamic. And I think, for sure, I have people in my life that are kind of mentors to me, who we see the world very differently, but we have a lot of respect for each other, and we both have gotten a lot out of that connectivity over time. So you can't do this alone. You do need people who look out for you, and at some point you end up looking out for them. I do find it's not a one-way street. Sometimes it is, but I've often found, as I've been around a long time, that it ends up being a two-way street, which I love, because in a sense, if there's a way to repay that, when your mentor calls and asks you for advice, you know that it had an impact on them, that they were able to help you, that now they trust you enough that they're asking the same of you. And I think those are special moments. I haven't had many of those. I've had a few, and they're special moments.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. And I think this idea that the relationship and the learning can go both ways and be very important for both people.
I think, the mentors I've had, the ones who really get into it are the ones who really think they're getting something out of it. Like, they're really into it. They're not just sitting there, oh, I've got to talk to this kid and I've got to give them 15 minutes worth of advice. No, they're actually realizing they're getting something out of it, because they're learning They may be learning a perspective on what it's like for other people on their team. What are they dealing with? And by the way, the generational, as we talk about a lot, right? That there's a pretty big gap, in terms of the perspectives of the world, like the post-social media world. And now we're dealing with the post-pandemic world and what the kids had to deal with who were in school, who went to school from home. It didn't have that same social interaction, et cetera, and some of the challenges they faced, right? And so to be able to interact with other kids who had the same situation, young people, right, as they're going into their careers, and all of a sudden we're saying, oh, we go to the office 5 days a week, and this is what it's like, and we're not on Zoom all the time, and all that. So it constantly evolves, and so being able to plug in with more than just your immediate team. Mentoring is a great way to do that and to learn more about what's going on out there. Like we just had our annual meeting, and there was 700. There used to be 100 people. I didn't know what to do with 700 people, but there's a lot of young people there, and so it was really helpful for me to talk to people that are the peers of my team, but that aren't on my team. So it was just like, hey, what's going on with your business? How do you guys interact? What's your team like? So I can learn more that way.
I think also a thread that has been throughout this conversation is the idea of continuous growth and learning from many, many sources. There's
Mm-hmm.
books, there's the work, but then there's also learning from people who are at your level, but also people who are younger and learning a different perspective. I love the idea of making sure that you're talking with people who think about things in a different way than you, because
Yeah,
sometimes it might challenge something.
yeah.
Well, Dan, we're coming to the end of our time. I had a feeling that it would go very quickly because I always find lots of things to talk about with you. But I've got two quick last questions for
Mhm.
you. The first one is, what advice would you give to your younger self? Let's say 22-year-old Dan, what would you want him to know?
Um, don't be afraid to take a risk and try something different. Um, uh, you still, you can swing and miss and still get back up to bat. It's not, because there's sort of this fatalistic view that, if I was listening to a basketball coach clip the other day. My son sent me, who's 27, so older than the 22-year-old, and he said, failure is fertilizer for what grows in the future. And I was really powerful. Like literally, I have not forgotten it since the moment I saw it. And it's true. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to take a swing and miss. I'm not a baseball person, but it's a sports analogy, right? But don't be afraid to swing and miss, and try different things. Don't be willing to try something different. It was the same way when I was in school. I had sat with a group of kids. I think we were when we were at Alice, right? When we were talking to the kids, and I was like, study something very different. They were asking me what did I really enjoy when I was in school, and I was like, what did I love? I took this government class, but was amazing, and I got to go listen to Carl Sagan speak twice. I mean, that's what I remember about school. As much as I love Jim Eister teaching us about management contracts, which I loved. Those were the two things I really remember, was Ben Ginsberg and Carl Sagan. That's like when I tell my kids, what was it like, Carl Sagan? So anyway, it's like, try something completely different than what you're doing. To try and I try to do that today. Like, I am 59 years old and I'm trying to learn how to play guitar. It is ugly, but I'm using a completely different kind of side of my brain. And I always, like, when I was 22, I would have been like so embarrassed to do that. Don't be embarrassed of any of that stuff. So that's a very long answer. So I apologize.
That's okay. And you're reminding me I need to go practice the drums. But the same idea, I needed to use another side of my brain,
Just
and
to
I'm
just to
still
check
pretty
out, do
awful.
something different, right?
Absolutely. Do something
Yeah,
that you've always wanted to do that's very different.
yeah.
And Dan, you've given us so much great advice during the course of this conversation. Do you have one last nugget of advice you'd like to share with our audience who is looking to advance their careers?
You know, um, uh, don't worry about what other people think. Just do your thing. Not to quote an old white guy, but Teddy Roosevelt said, right, it's not the critic who counts, right? The credit belongs to the person in the arena. Just go out there and live your life, build your career, follow your dream. Don't worry about, don't worry about the critics. Don't worry about what other people think. Don't worry about being judged. I spent a lot of time in my career worrying about what, like, am I catching up? Am I keeping up with my peers? Where am I relative to? It doesn't matter at all. I was older. I was one of the older kids in my graduating class. I was like, oh, I'm never going to catch up. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter in the least. Live your life. Follow your dream. Build your career. Build your life. Don't worry about what other people think. Just live the best life you can. Be the best member of your community, the best member of your family, and the best part of your team you can. And the chips will fall as they do. There's nothing you can do about that. So that's my advice.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Dan. I really value your friendship over the years and am so happy that you were able to make some time to share your learnings over your incredible career with our audience.
Wow. Thanks so much, Lynn. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm very excited about the podcast and all the great conversations you've had and so many to come in the future. So I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Dan.
Take care.
And for our audience, if you've enjoyed this conversation with Dan, I hope you'll go to our website. It's personalstories.com, where you can find many more incredible interviews with hospitality industry